excited to be here. I want to just be the first to say, welcome to the Resistance. My name is Michelle Tan. I am the editorial director of Makers. And what we do is we are a storytelling platform, a feminist media brand that really tells the stories of today's trailblazers to inspire change makers of tomorrow. And I am so excited to have one of those trailblazers right here with us today, Emma Gray, the author of A Girl's Guide to Joining the Resistance.
Thanks for chatting with me, Michelle.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm inspired by your book, and I think we should just jump right into it. It's a feminist handbook on fighting for good. What inspired this book project for you?
Well, I'm a journalist at HuffPost, and I largely cover the intersection of gender and politics. So, I found myself covering the 2016 election, and I was at the Javits Center on election night with the Clinton campaign.
Well, I have to lean back.
Yeah, I know, trigger warning. And my team thought we were gonna be writing a story about our nation's first woman president being elected, and instead we ended up writing a very different story, spending the wee hours of the morning on the street, interviewing a lot of very scared, grief-stricken people who were very, very angry. And then a few months later, I got to cover the Women's March in DC, and I got to see firsthand what it looks like when that grief and anger is channeled into civic action, and it was incredibly powerful.
And talk about your journey in doing all of that. You are covering, obviously, talking to so many women after that Javits Center moment, and then also talking to people at the Women's March. Can you talk about your journey, which you actually detail in the book, about sort of your rise to activism because of the 2016 election?
Well, I grew up in a really politically engaged family. I grew up right outside Washington, D.C., so just naturally was right by the center of our political system. And I, went with my family to LGBT marches in the early 90s. And
by the way, she was 5. She was 5 years old when she went to her first march.
My grandmother was with me. And, so I think I just sort of had that infectious energy of what protest and what getting involved meant. And then, of course, professionally got to cover it, got to cover the Black Lives Matter marches, got to cover the Women's March. And, once you see the difference that people's energy and anger can make, you can't unsee it.
Right, but you also felt it. I want you to talk about what you did in DC after the 2016 election in terms of organizing that incredible event during the inauguration.
Yeah, so on election night, or the night after election, I ended up meeting with a couple of friends, a few of whom are here in this room right now.
Hello.
At a bar.
There they are, I see them.
And 2 of us worked at Bustle and 2 of us worked at HuffPost at the time, and we thought we want to do something with the platforms that we have to create a space for dialogue and education on a day that might feel really scary for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so we somehow cobbled together a bit of money. We reached out to every contact that we had and got Michael Moore and Ashley Judd and Representative Barbara Lee to come spend the day with us and speak to a room full of 300 people. And at the end of it, we weren't quite sure how it was going to go. We weren't sure if it was going to happen at all. And at the end of an exhausting day, a few people came up to all of us and said, "You saved my day." And it was such a moment of realization. Like, you don't have to save the world, but maybe you'll save a couple people's days.
What I love is that you're not just talking the talk. You're walking the walk in terms of the activism, in terms of really joining that resistance. And what's interesting is that you're focusing this book on the younger audience. And what we're seeing right now, obviously, is a huge shift because of this younger generation, not only because of the large scope of what the Parkland teens are even achieving, but even on an individual basis. You also have like a 14-year-old girl who's raising $21,000 so a bunch of young teen girls can go and watch A Wrinkle in Time. We're seeing young women, young men and women really rise to the occasion. Why did you want to speak to this generation specifically?
Well, I think young women in particular are a group that is so often diminished and dismissed,
right.
Taught to make themselves small, told that their opinions don't matter. And what we see is that young people and young women in particular are extremely, extremely powerful. And there is a long and storied history of young people leading the charge and driving social movements in this country. Obviously the Parkland teens are building on the work that young people in communities of color have done for decades fighting for gun control. And so we, build off of each other's work. And young people are powerful as hell. Don't dismiss them.
Absolutely. And what I love is that you were talking about the intersectionality. You just brought up that there's a group of young teens, obviously, in the Black community who are already talking about gun reform, Parkland teens taking that baton, and everybody's sort of advancing the mission together. And what's so great about this book is that there's an entire section dedicated to intersectionality. How did that come to be, and how are those conversations for you? And what did you learn from that?
I think that was probably the first section that I knew needed to be in the book. I was extremely aware that I was coming at this issue as a white woman, and not just a white woman, as a straight, cisgender white woman. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't my story that was being centered in this, that I was doing what I know how to do as a journalist, going out and interviewing women who come from all different kinds of backgrounds, who are active on all different types of issues, and getting their perspective and amplifying it.
Yeah.
And, I think Sarah Sophie Flicker, who's actually here with us tonight, said something really fantastic to me when I was interviewing her about being, a white woman who organizes next to women of color all the time.
Yeah.
And she said, so often as white women, we worry about saying the right thing. Will we say the right thing? Will we be the right kind of ally? And the beautiful thing is that it's not that you have to say the right thing. You just need to show up and you need to listen. You
Right.
don't always have to be the one to lead the conversation. And it also takes the pressure off of us then.
I mean, a round of applause for that sentiment, please. Just even having that. And even opening up that conversation, I think, is incredible. What has been some of the feedback that you've been getting from this book? Like, what have people been saying to you? And just sort of, even in the context of just all of the different women you were able to gather together for this book.
I think I was bracing myself for the trolls. Anyone who works online as a woman writing about feminism knows that that's kind of part of it. But actually, the reaction has been so overwhelmingly positive.
Great.
And I've had young women come up to me and say, I'm so glad that you spoke to intersectionality. I'm so glad that you mentioned self-care. Thank you for giving me a resource that I can turn back to when I'm feeling down and re-energize me. And so that's just been incredibly heartening, because what's the point of writing a book if it's not going to, make a difference to anyone?
And what did you learn from the process? Obviously, you're a constant journalist, you're always curious. What is it that you learned from all of these different conversations and even just the process of writing a book itself?
That writing is a lot of work, always. That's the first thing. Nothing about writing it was easy. But I learned so much about the generosity of spirit that so many women who took the time to speak with me on short notice. This whole thing was a very quick process. And they took the time to speak with me, not because they love me, but because they want to share their wisdom with other young women that might not have as easy access to them as I do.
Right.
And I found that just to be incredibly, incredibly powerful, that someone like Senator Elizabeth Warren would take the time to answer my questions.
Right. And I think that actually goes to sort of what is advancing the movement now, is that we are opening up and sharing our stories. And we're opening up and really having those conversations. What do you think are some of the next steps that young women can take, or even us here in the room, from the lessons that you have from this book?
Well, I think exactly what you said, that the power of our stories is infinite. And I wasn't even going to I have a whole chapter in here about the power of storytelling,
Yeah.
which wasn't originally going to be in there. But then once I started speaking to women, almost every single one of them brought that up. And I'm so glad I did include it, because after I wrote the draft, Me Too happened.
Right.
We are watching the power of storytelling play out in real time. And it's incredible. And when one person tells their story, it opens up the space for other people to tell their stories. So I think we so often, don't want to take up space.
Yeah.
And we don't want to say, this thing happened to me and it's important. But I think we should own the importance of our experiences.
Absolutely, and be really confident in that and be very vulnerable in that space.
Exactly.
And, in the type of work that you do, and obviously in sort of fighting for these causes, it's really easy to sort of get downtrodden, or really just sort of just in a dark place. Let's all face it, we've all reached for that glass of wine many times when we read those headlines.
I want one right now.
But what is it that keeps you motivated, or how do you stay out of that space? Because obviously we're being inundated by a lot of, again, dark headlines sometimes. Where do you find that light, and where do you find your motivation?
Yeah, and certainly, being in the news day in, day out is exhausting, even if you don't have to do it for your job.
Yeah.
And I think the key is to give ourselves permission to step back sometimes and take space to recharge and take space to turn off of our phones and log off of Facebook and do the things that genuinely bring us joy and, as I said, recharge that internal battery.
Right.
Some of the women I spoke to said, for me, that's, spending a night in with my family. Some people said it's binging my favorite show on Netflix, which I found very relatable. Or going to therapy, going to a yoga class, whatever brings you joy, whatever allows you to stay sane, you have to allow yourself space to do that.
And what are your go-tos?
Yoga, therapy, and Netflix.
Nice.
So I just use myself. And right there.
And I guess what are some of the things you really want young people to take away from even just the idea of making an impact? I think the pressure to make a big impact is there, obviously. We have social media, which is probably one of our most powerful weapons, but in that, there's obviously that stress of getting all the likes. There's a stress of making that big movement happen. Are there certain messages that you want to tell people about making those movements, big and small? Every little step is really helpful in those times.
Yeah, obviously it's fantastic if you can amplify your message to as many people as possible. But also we need people to be paying attention to what's going on locally. If you can make a difference, in the way that your county covers sex education, that could change the way a generation looks at consent.
Right.
That might not make, a million headlines or have celebrities tweeting at you, but that's going to make a real difference. If you find one candidate for city council whose platform you really support and you go out and you canvass for them, that makes a difference.
Right.
So I think to take the pressure off of yourself, not to, as we said before, change the world overnight, but just to do what you can with the tools that you have at your fingertips.
And can you share a little bit about what you would do as a teenager? Obviously, growing up in DC, you and I were kind of talking about what you would do in terms of your form of protest as a teenager, just to share some of those stories.
Well, I was actually very struck by all of the walkouts that were being organized that have been getting so much coverage now because, living outside DC in 2003 when the Iraq War happened, a lot of the students in my county, in Montgomery County, Maryland, organized walkouts, and we came and wore black armbands, we organized assemblies, we walked out of school, and I had almost kind of forgotten about that until Parkland happened, and I went back and found an old Washington Post article from 2003 about, high school students are walking out of class to protest the Iraq War, and it was just cool also to imagine what an impact that could have made had we had, Twitter or Instagram.
Right. No, I mean, you can only imagine sort of the platforms that you can use now. And what are some of the resources that you found to be helpful? You have an entire section in your book dedicated to that. Are there certain ones that you love to point out to people that people can really look to now?
I learned there are a lot of apps related to the resistance, which is very cool.
Yeah.
I think things like ResistBot, where you can literally text messages that will be turned into faxes and emails to your elected representatives, is really cool. Countable, which allows you to pay attention to legislation, and something like Daily Action, which will literally text you an action to do each day. I think anything that you can use to keep yourself accountable when it gets exhausting, that you don't have to think about, what am I supposed to do today?
Right.
Technology will literally tell you, great, bring on the robots, right?
It's like Westworld for the resistance.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
it. It's so great. I think we can open up to questions for folks, and anybody who wants to engage with this incredible woman, and also ask any questions about her book, or just open up the discussion again about what's going on in the world.
We can just
feminism.
chat, too.
Yes. We can just have that open discussion. If anybody wants to. Hi.
My name is Alana.
Hi.
I know Emma somewhat. I just had a question. I think that obviously you're such an expert in this, especially after writing a full book. There's so many different places to start, and I was wondering what's kind of the first actionable step you would tell a young person today. A lot of times there's so many resources, there's so many places to start. What's the advice you would give to a young person who might not know where to start?
I would say pick one issue that you feel really, really strongly about. The thing that you think you have enough energy to sustain the marathon, not just the sprint. And look up the organizations and the individuals that are already doing the work in that space, and either shoot an individual an email or go on that organization's website and say, okay, I have X amount of time, X amount of money, what can I do to support you? The good thing is you don't have to build it because people are already doing it. So you just have to show up.
I would also tell everybody to just buy her book as a first step as well, by the way.
Thank you for the plug.
Here for you, girl. Is there anybody else who just wants to bring up a topic or conversation? Oh, yeah, hi.
Hi, my name's Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
My question is this a book that men and boys should read? And what role can men, or brothers and spouses, if we have male spouses and dads and uncles, what role can they play?
I love this question.
I love this question too. I absolutely think, first of all, that men and boys can read this book because, hey, as women and girls, we are constantly finding pieces of ourselves and things to relate to and things that are written by and about and for men. So welcome to the club, dudes. And also, I think that men are such an important part of this conversation. And I definitely think that we in women's spaces need to leave space to bring men into the conversation. But I would also ask that men who are interested take it upon themselves to show up and to talk to other men about why it's important to show up.
Absolutely. I think, to advance this movement, we have to have everybody involved, right? It almost comes to some part of the intersectionality of it. You have to involve everybody for everybody to move forward. And actually, to quote Emma, it's we all rise together or we all fall together. And I thought that was such a really poignant quote to really bring out of this book. We have time for one more question.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I know.
No, I love it. Come on up.
That's how eagerly I wanted to ask this question.
I love that.
We've been talking so much about young people and their activism and just being, these teenagers and even younger than that I was curious, do you have a first feminist memory?
Ooh, that's a good one. Maybe going to the march with my grandmother or reading the vagina monologues at age 12 at summer camp.
Of course you did.
Obviously. It's very on brand for me.
Clearly.
Thank you.
Was that like a gift that you were given?
I don't even remember. There were just copies floating around, If you go
just
to
have
Jew camp,
copies?
it's just there.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's in the air. Events.
Actually, yes. What kind of camp was that? Shout out to the Jew camp.
Yeah, hippie Jew camp. Camp Mosheva in Maryland. Yeah, Laura actually knows what camp it is. She just wanted to bait me there. Yeah.
So I think that's all the time that we have. I just really want to say thank you so much again for joining the Resistance, for having this conversation for us. Emma, thank you so much for writing this book. And I think it's time for all of us to celebrate her and raise a glass to the Resistance and to Emma. Thank you so much.